So you are traveling to another country with the purpose to see wildlife, whether it's bird watching, herping, wildlife photography, and you want to do it on a budget. I have some tips for you coming up right after this. Welcome everyone, my channel is called Adventure Ed and I give you tips on how to enhance your experience as a naturalist in the field. We do everything here from bird watching to herping, wildlife photography, ecotourism travel, app and gear reviews. If you're interested, hit the subscribe button and the bell for notifications. So wildlife tourism across the world is getting more and more popular. The truth is, in many locations, it's really not all that cheap. Now, what are some reasons why wildlife tourism might not be the cheapest thing in the world? Well, I think that a lot of people who do wildlife tourism tend to be older people. They tend to have more money. So that is the target market for wildlife tour companies. I'm not saying that in a bad way. It's a business. Tour companies are doing what they should do. So I have spent more than 2.5 years abroad in Latin America, Australia, also done some traveling in Southeast Asia. I lived abroad when I was in my early 20s and I was always trying to see wildlife. And therefore, I feel like I have some experience on doing wildlife tourism on a budget. So let's get into it. All right, my camera just ran out of juice, so now I'm going old school style on the phone. So my first tip might seem pretty obvious, but it's often one that a lot of people don't think of, and it's to budget all other parts of your travel other than the wildlife viewing itself. So for example, do whatever you can to find the cheapest flights you can, stay in more budget hotels and hostels, or camp to save money over paying for an expensive hotel. Take public transportation instead of taking private shuttles. Eat street food or eat at cheaper restaurants. Cook your food yourself instead of going on like a week-long package ecotourism tour where you stay at really fancy places. Just do separate day tours, travel budget outside of those day tours. There's tons of YouTube videos out there. I can even put a couple links below on how to save money while traveling generally. Now, one other thing you can do is pick your destination based on what the cost of the budget travel is. So for example, third world countries, developing countries that are in the tropics will tend to have lower costs of living and lower costs of traveling than if you go to a lot of developed countries. And luckily, the places that have a lot of exotic wildlife in tropical ecosystems where a lot of wildlife tourism is, for example, in Central America and Southeast Asia, those places are actually places that you actually can travel on a really good budget. So I'm gonna take a walk through this eucalyptus stand before I get to my next tip. Catch you guys in a bit. So my next tip is to reduce the cost of the actual tour that you book. Now you might ask, how do you do this? Well, the first one is the most obvious. Book your tour far enough in advance, because a lot of times if you book it like the day before, it'll cost you more money. In the case of birding, herping, wildlife photography, local guides tend to be cheaper than doing like, again, one of those expensive packages, where you have a guide from a large company who might be from another country. Local guides just tend to be cheaper, and I think there's a lot of benefits to having a local guide. They teach you about the local culture, the local environment. It really turns into a really cool cultural experience. The next thing I suggest you doing to get your tour down, if you really are on a strict budget, is to ask the tour company that you're booking the tour what exactly the breakdown and the price is, and then ask them if you can cut out any parts that you don't think are necessary. You say, hey, like, is there any way to reduce the cost of transportation and food? In case it is possible, they might say, hey, you can take a public bus with the guide and that'll really cut the cost down. For food, you can say, yeah, like, I'm willing to skip the meal and just get a meal on my own later. One other thing you can do as well is you can just try to straight up bargain with them and just say, hey, I only have this much money, I can only afford this much. Maybe you can negotiate. I really found that when I was in college, I was able to do this a lot because people just kind of have some sympathy for college kids who have no money. And of course, you obviously do not want to be rude. This is a business. You want to give people their value. You want to pay for the value of your wildlife guide. But if you have a good reason to bargain and a good reason to be on such a strict budget, I figure why not? Another thing that you can do to reduce the cost of your trip is to combine tours with another tour group. One thing that makes wildlife tourism pretty expensive is that they usually bring you out in smaller groups. And there's a good reason for that, is because generally in smaller groups, you're less likely to scare wildlife away. You know, if they book a tour and if it's a private tour, you can just go ahead and ask them, yeah, it'd be cheaper for me, better for me if I could combine it with another group. And if that other group is okay with it, and the guide is okay with it, then hey, you got a cheaper tour. All right, so we're gonna walk a little bit more, and then I'm going to get to my third tip. Dude, I really love this eucalyptus forest I'm in. I'm actually in Australia right now, and no, I'm just kidding, man. I'm actually in San Diego. Eucalyptus trees are introduced. I don't know if you would consider them invasive technically. I have actually heard about some negative things about the ecological impacts of eucalyptus trees. I guess if you know anything about that, comment below. My third tip is to find someone to bring you out into nature and view wildlife and not actually pay them for it. Probably the best way to do it is through the internet or social media. To find someone who essentially is just a volunteer to take you out just for fun, just for courtesy. You might ask, how in the world do I find like a free wildlife guide? Specifically, for example, with bird watching, there are so many resources out there to find someone to take you out birding. There's Facebook groups. You can connect with people on Instagram. Search hashtags on Instagram, Twitter, pretty much all social media platforms. There is pretty much a bird watching chapter, whether it's the Audubon or whatever type of bird watching club for pretty much almost any county in the entire United States, and pretty much any area in any developed country for that matter. And the birding community is really starting to get much stronger all over the world. Now, there also are many other directories. Birding Pal is an online directory where people have just put their names up to volunteer to take a visitor out birding for the day. And you know, you're kind of expected to offer money for gas and lunch, but I've actually used that tons of times. I used it like 15 times when I studied abroad in Australia in college. I got basically like 15 free birding tours of really expert birders who had just volunteered to put their information online. Now, I'm just talking about birding, but there are all types of people out there with different interests in wildlife, general wildlife photography. There's people who are interested in herps. There's even people interested in insects, like in so many places that you would not imagine. And there's also email groups too that I want to make sure that a lot of people don't forget about, because although a lot of nature lovers are heavily invested in social media and on website directories, a lot of them still only do email. So make sure that when you're searching, look for email listservs as well. Now, another way to find people to take you out is find people who are doing research, find academics. For example, when I recently went to Thailand, I just Googled Thailand Biological Field Station, and I found this field station where they were doing herpetology research. They were doing all these studies on snakes. So I just messaged them, and they're like, yeah, it's cool. Like, if you just want to come here and stay, just kind of tag along. And essentially, I got a free herping tour by going there. The researchers in their free time just took me out herping for fun. We found some lizards, and it was really cool. So, you know, with a lot of academics, you know, they're busy and they might not have time for, you know, to take out a random person to just go look for wildlife for fun. But the truth is there's a reason why they're already invested in their passion, and that's because they love nature. You know, a lot of them, if they have time, they would love to take you out, you know, just as long as you're courteous and respectful. Yeah, and you know, it doesn't have to be an academic person. It can be any type of biologist in any industry. All right, we're gonna do a little bit more walking through this fake Australia landscape, and that will bring us to my fourth tip. My fourth tip is to offer something in exchange. For example, you could volunteer somewhere. Right after college, I volunteered at a bird lodge in Ecuador, the Taniapa Bird Lodge, the coolest place to see hummingbirds in the world. I stayed at the lodge for free, but I just helped out with all these busy tasks around the lodge. And then I had plenty of time to go bird watching and even tag along on some bird tours with professional guides who came through the lodge. Now, I think the minimum that you had to stay there for that volunteership was something like a month. So, you know, not everyone has a month, just a month free in their life. You know, there are ways that you can volunteer even for a week in places. There's many dive shops that if you volunteer, maybe they'll give you free dives or discounts on dives, or they might give you a certification for free. If you have a certain skill set, for example, if you're good at making videos. I actually had a friend when I studied abroad in Australia. He was really good at making films, and he made a promotional video for a dive shop, and they ended up giving him his certification for free. If you are a social media influencer like me, I'm just kidding, even with like a few thousand followers on Instagram or on YouTube, you can even start to have leverage over, you know, whether it's some type of sponsorship or some type of discount on a tour in exchange for promoting whatever product or whatever service someone offers. So, you know, maybe you can use your social media as leverage. Writing a blog, an online blog, is another way. Any type of advertising. And here's something else that a lot of people don't realize. If you have a drone, you can actually have some leverage as well. Even with no followers, a lot of places are just looking for stock drone footage of whatever place, whether it's their hotel or the land that they have a tour on. If you just say, yeah, I'll bring my drone there, fly my drone, get some stock footage, they might actually end up letting you stay there for some type of discount. And that was actually exactly what happened to me. Brought my drone to Vietnam. I gave them some stock footage of their whole reserve. And yeah, it was really cool. They let me stay there for like half price. So yeah, anything that you can give back, you might get a discount on something. And also it feels good just to contribute, especially in the world of wildlife tourism, to give something, even if it's not in exchange for anything too. All right, gonna do a little bit more walking before we get to our last point. We'll see what we find in here.
Just got up, something's wrong, I waited up with wounds.
So my fifth and last tip is to not pay for a tour at all or even find anyone else, but to just go looking for wildlife by yourself. In general, I like to have a guide because, again, like I said, not only do I get some trained eyes to point out wildlife for me, but it also turns into a really cool cultural experience. But to be honest, with all of the resources out there, if you just put the effort in, you can really do a good job finding wildlife, whether it's birds, whether it's reptiles. There are many databases online that use citizen science to point out the location of places. And in case you don't know what I mean by that, it's, you know, just the general public. They see some type of wildlife in a certain place and they submit that information to a database. There's a map. You can go there and find it. The most famous example is eBird. There are so many guidebooks, so many apps, so many other blog posts out there that other people have written that usually if you just study up enough on everything, you can actually do a pretty decent job yourself at finding things. It's still usually not going to be as good as a really experienced guide. And one thing I do recommend is that if you do choose to go places by yourself, also just do research on the safety of places that you're going. One thing I love about wildlife tourism is you often go to off the beaten path places that not that many other people have gone to, but you just want to make sure that you're going to a safe place. So just research the safety of everything. And one other thing I do want to just mention is that everything I've said has nothing to do with the sustainability of tourism. So sometimes a wildlife tour that is more expensive might be a more sustainable and more environmentally friendly tour. Other times it's not the case. I'm planning on making a video on environmentally sustainable tourism. So once I'm done with that video, I'll put the card at the top of the screen so you can check that video out. All right, guys, so that's all I have for today, and I hope you enjoyed this video. Again, if you are interested in tips on how to enhance your experience observing wildlife in nature, in the field, whether it's in your own backyard or traveling to exotic places around the world, feel free to subscribe to the channel and hit the notification bell. Also, if you have any other ideas how to reduce the cost of your wildlife tourism trip, feel free to post in the comments below. Thank you and peace out.